Daniel Jones and Jayden Higgins are sneaky good fantasy plays this week. We get into the best sleepers and DFS plays for week 14 on today's episode of Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Fantasy Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcasting network. Thank you for making us your first listen every day. I'm one of your co-hosts, Michelle Magdziuk, and when I'm not doing this, I'm a researcher and fantasy analyst with NFL Network.
And I'm your other co-host, Vinnie Iyer. When I'm not doing this, I'm writing about NFL, fantasy, and betting for sportingnews.com.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Today, like every Friday during the season, we get into our sleepers of the week. Vinny and I will each give you one quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end that we think could be a sleeper, a little sneaky start this week for week 14 fantasy. Then we'll get into our daily fantasy talks with our PrizePicks picks of the week and our winning FanDuel lineup to end today's show. Let's start with our quarterback sleeper of the week. Vinny, who do you got?
Yeah, I'm going with Jordan Love. He's actually only still the average QB 19 on the season, so he definitely qualifies as a sleeper despite having the big game last week against the Lions with 4 touchdown passes. And that turned out to be a pretty significant performance because the Lions turned around at home, had a very good performance against Dak Prescott and the Cowboys, containing them a little bit with pressure and turnovers. So that did show that Jordan Love played really well in that game as opposed to Dak Prescott, who played okay in that same matchup. So you feel more confident about Love going into the home game against the Bears. The Bears are very giving to quarterbacks. They're tough to run on. They have some receiver coverage issues with their corners for sure. So I think everything is lining up well. Christian Watson has a great matchup in this one as well. So Love Watson, that's a good combination. We know the other receivers have gotten involved. Dontavian Wicks making plays. Romeo Doubs has been there for a while. They're trying to resurrect tight end. The backs are catching passes. Jordan Love is just looking better overall. And he tends to be a streaky quarterback, Michelle. So when you look at that streaky, he's on a hot streak. I think he keeps it up. And look, these are their 2 most important games in the stretch, back to back. And I think Love will play well and respond, and everyone can get off Matt LaFleur and the Packers here for what they're doing offensively.
Love is definitely a streaky quarterback. So you're right there. If he can keep that streak going, he should have a really good game and a good matchup. Now, mine is Daniel Jones against the Jaguars. And again, like you brought up with Jordan Love, these might not seem like big sleeper names, but I mean, the last month for Daniel Jones has not been kind to him. He has not been a good fantasy back. It's been, or a fantasy quarterback. It's been 14 points, 15, 16, 16 the last 4 games. But I think this week is the week it gets turned around. He starts his December off nicely after a terrible November. But 6 of the last 7 quarterbacks to face the Jaguars have put up at least 20 fantasy points against them. And that's including Patrick Mahomes, Matthew Stafford, Geno Smith, and Davis Mills, who each of them scored over 26 points against the Jaguars in that span. The Jags are a really, really good run defense, right? So they're likely going to be able to control Jonathan Taylor a bit, at least a bit. That's going to force the Colts to have to lean on their passing game. This is a crucial game for the Colts to win. And I think like guys like Alec Pierce and Michael Pittman Jr. and even Josh Downs, and then obviously Tyler Warren will get involved. They should all have really solid games. I don't know who will have the best one out of that group, but that means Daniel Jones then puts it all together. And I think he can put up a 20-point performance this week.
Yeah, the other thing is Trevor Lawrence on the other side has a bit of a hot streak going. Speaking of streaky quarterbacks, he's had multiple touchdowns in back-to-back weeks. That's breaking news for Trevor Lawrence. So he's playing really well in this matchup as well. So it should be a good back-and-forth affair between Jones and Lawrence. Now, let me turn over to my sleeper running back. Now, this one's a bit touchdown dependent, but this team that he's playing is giving up a lot of short touchdowns. It's Chris Rodriguez Jr. at the Vikings. The run defense was pretty good early in the year, but then they had that issue with Emmanuel Wilson. They're filling in for Josh Jacobs just a couple weeks ago. They're having trouble in the red zone. Last week, Zach Charbonnet and Kenneth Walker III really just gash this team on the ground. It's the Vikings. I think they've gotten weaker as we progressed over the course of the season in trying to stop the running game. So Chris Rodriguez is also the style of back they struggle with, the power back pounding in the middle of the field. And that's what the Commanders will do. And we just heard for sure that Jayden Daniels will be starting that game in Minnesota. So that changes the look of the offense. When you have the running quarterback, you got to worry about him. Look, in relation to Corey Krosky-Merritt and Jeremy McNichols, this has been the guy that's getting the key touches of late for the Commanders. So I feel pretty good about it as a start here this week. RB2 or flex play for sure. You should get Rodriguez in your lineup against the Vikings.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a lower ceiling play, but if you're desperate, I don't mind it. Now, a guy like more is Devin Neal. I get it. Last week, he got a shot. He got 17 touches, and it did not turn into very much production at all. But and I get it too. It's like, well, he was against the Dolphins. He should have done well. The Dolphins defense has actually been really good as of late. 13 points allowed to the Bills, 13 points to Commanders, 17 points to the Saints, 10 points to the Falcons in week 8. So the only game they gave up a lot of points to were the Ravens. But even in those games, they held Bijan Robinson to like 25 rushing yards. James Cook, 50 rushing yards. Terrible for him. The Commanders don't really have a run game unless you want to count Chris Rodriguez. And so, yeah, they held Devin Neal. Like that wasn't going to be a hard accomplishment for them after holding guys like Bijan and James Cook. But this week he gets the Buccaneers, who have allowed the 4th most fantasy points per game to the starting running backs this season. Obviously, if Alvin Kamara ends up playing, then Devin Neal's out. But if Kamara is out, I think Devin Neal is actually a viable low-end RB2 flex play. Again, 17 touches last week. He was on the field for 81.4% of the time. Only guys like Bijan and Jonathan Taylor and those big name guys had more playing time. There's only 5 running backs ahead of him. And Evan, and he gets, the targets in the backfield too. He had 3 targets, got some yards there as well. So, I mean, Evan Hall barely saw the field and only got 5 touches. He was the only other running back to see the field in this game for the Saints. So I like Devin Neal against the Buccaneers as long as Kamara's out.
Yeah, Devin Neal is going to need a whole lot of volume, and Rodriguez is going to need the key volume near the red zone and scoring position to really come through on those. But that's why they're sleepers. They're not the top of the line guys. They're guys that have some promising situations this week. Now, I'll reveal my wide receiver, and we talked about him a bit at the end of the wide receiver ranking show if you missed that. But Jayden Higgins is the guy for me. The rookie has looked good. He's separated a little bit from the other Iowa State rookie now with Jalen Noel being more of a slot guy, and then Christian Kirk's return has kind of cut into that, whatever. But when you look at it with Nico Collins, the attention has been there in coverage. That's why you're seeing a little bit more target volume go to Dalton Schultz. Jayden Higgins has been consistently involved here as a number 2 for several weeks now, despite having quarterback changes between Davis Mills and CJ Stroud. It doesn't matter the quarterback. It seems like Higgins is being involved. They drafted him. He's a nice big frame for the outside, and he's a really nice complement to Collins, and I think that continues here as, again, Jalen Watson is the weaker of the Chiefs corners.
Yeah, Higgins is really coming along. I'm excited to see what he can do the rest of this season for his rookie season and in his career. Now, I'm going back to the same guy I had as a sleeper last week. That might be boring to you. I'm sorry, but it's Jakobi Meyers against the Colts. Nice matchup against the Colts. Colts have allowed the 9th most points per game to wide receivers this season. And Meyers has been Trevor Lawrence's go-to guy, has a touchdown in each of the last 2 weeks, had 90 receiving yards last week with 6 receptions. So I think he's the guy you can trust there more than Brian Thomas Jr. We got Parker Washington injured, so Jakobi Meyers should even get more work. And I just think he's going to be involved, and I think he's the safest Jaguars wide receiver available to play.
Yeah, and Brian Thomas Jr., again, he is a little bit more volatile at this point. He's a guy that can make things happen, but he hasn't been the same this season, maybe in and out with injuries, a little bit of sophomore slump there. Parker Washington's out. I mean, I think Trevor Lawrence is going to keep going to Jakobi Meyers, a very valuable receiver. We talked about he doesn't drop things. He runs good routes. He will get open often against the Colts. Now, I'm going to pick my tight end. He's a tight end wide receiver hybrid that I really think is more like, and it's Harold Fannin Jr. Like, he has felt something here with Shador Sanders the past few games. And look, it's not been spectacular numbers, but last week he did have a touchdown against the 49ers. So that was good to see him finding the end zone. He made a big play early in the game that we first saw Shador Sanders, and the Raiders game, who was also involved. So when we're looking at Fannin rookie combination, usually does pretty well because they've taken a lot of practice reps together. Fannin and Sanders not being necessarily on the first team early, so they do have a good chemistry building between them. Fannin is a guy that you can create mismatches with. I know the Titans on paper don't allow fantasy points to the tight end. That's because everyone can exploit them doing everything else. But we also have to look at the Browns in the situation to say he's clearly the go-to guy for Sanders for whatever that's worth, right? They're not going to be trying to throw the ball 50 times. I think they would love to throw the ball 20 or less times and win the game. So it's not like Jerry Jeudy or any of these receivers are doing any damage, but I do like Fannin. I think you can get him open against this team this week. So I do like Fannin in that matchup against Tennessee, and really the Browns should play ahead, so they should have a lot of ways to get their offense going this week.
Yeah, I like Harold Fannin Jr. this week as well as a potential guy that could get a lot of targets. Now, mine is going to go Darren Waller against the Jets. We just saw the Jets let Kyle Pitts have a big game against them last week. The Jets have allowed 7 receiving touchdowns to tight ends this year. That's tied for the third most in the NFL. And, last week he comes back after missing a handful of games instantly. It puts up 47 receiving yards. It's not like a huge game, but he only played 47% of the snaps. He was up towards 70% in week 6 prior to getting injured in week 7. We saw him score 4 touchdowns over those first 3 weeks with the Dolphins. I think he plays more snaps this week as he gets back healthy. He was productive, very productive as a fantasy tight end before getting injured. So I like him this week in this matchup.
Yeah, and keep in mind, Waller did score twice in the first matchup against the Jets. I'm not saying you're going to get that again, but there's a very good chance he'll be thrown too often in the red zone. They need some help there with Joe and Waddle not having big games of late. They need some receiving help. So those are some really good picks. We might hear about some of these guys a little later in the show as we reveal our PrizePicks picks of the week. That'll be next. We'll also do our FanDuel lineups that we have not seen. So we'll share all that with you guys and each other right after this quick break. All right. This episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Now, NFL Sundays can move fast. One big play and suddenly everything feels different. That's what makes live betting with FanDuel so exciting. You're not just watching the game, you're reacting to it in real time. With FanDuel, you can place bets as the action unfolds, every drive, every momentum swing, every highlight moment. There's a lot of good stuff on the slate this week. I do like the Steelers to upset the Ravens. I also like the Colts as slate favorites, so pick them in that game against the Jaguars. You can get on the action however you want here with a full slate of games for week 14. So live betting is the best when the game starts to shift. A receiver gets hurt, a defense tightens up, or the momentum flips after the turnover. FanDuel lets you jump into the moment. Live spreads and money lines adjust instantly. Player props update as guys heat up. You can bet on next touchdown scores, drive results, totals, and more. It keeps you locked into every snap, every drive, every possibility. So if you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your live NFL bets all season long through the end of the season, all the way through the playoffs. FanDuel, the game moves fast, and so do you. All right, Michelle, it is time to reveal our PrizePicks picks of the week. This is where we do projections, more or less. We go with more because we're a fantasy show and we always want more points, not less. So we're going to be looking for yardage, catches, fantasy points, all that good stuff here this week, and look at 3 mores that we like. Michelle, what's your first more that you're going with your PrizePicks?
Yeah, I love this one. It's James Cook plus Chase Brown to have more than 151.5 combined rushing yards. So they're playing against each other in the same games. The Bengals and the Bills are 2 of the 3 worst run defenses in the NFL. They're both giving up over 140 rushing yards per game. So actually total, they're giving up a combined 294 rushing yards per game. And again, I only need 151.5 between Cook and Chase Brown combined. The last 5 weeks that both of them played. Last week, James Cook almost hit this by himself, right? But They combined for 222 yards last week. Week before that, 223. Now in weeks 8 and 9, they barely just didn't hit this at 151 and 147. And then week 7, 289. But again, it comes down to the matchups. It comes down to how good these players are playing. And I think they smashed that number, 151 and a half.
Yeah, that's an interesting combination. I looked at those guys individually as well for PrizePicks. It makes a lot of sense. It's really a dual great matchup, just like we had with the wide receivers there on Thursday night. And if we didn't have the injury and some lack of effort on the Cowboys side, I think you would have seen them come to that number here, but we'll move on. And I took a combination, but with a singular player, and it's Bucky Irving, more than 87 and a half scrimmage yards against Saints. I think he'll get it done. I don't care how he gets it done. The Saints allow more than 100 rushing yards per game. They allow close to 40 receiving yards per game to running backs. So Irving should be in great shape this week. He looked fantastic in his return for the Buccaneers against the Cardinals last week. He should earn a bigger workload. They didn't really push much of Sean Tucker or Rachaad White or anybody else on the field with him. So again, Irving was going back to his workhorse role. So I like that number. Relatively low, I think, for the Saints matchup at home in a game that I figure the Buccaneers will be leading for most of the way.
I like that a lot. Now I'm going to go with Michael Wilson of the Cardinals, more than 64 and a half receiving yards. Marvin Harrison Jr. is officially rolled out this week. He gets the Rams, and the Rams might seem like a scary defense. They have a great run defense, but they've allowed the 14th most receiving yards per game to wide receivers this season. So they're not shut down in the passing game or against wide receivers. And the 2 games that we got to see Michael Wilson without Marvin Harrison Jr., he put up 185 yards in week 11 and 118 yards in week 12. He had 25 receptions over those 2 games with 33 targets over those 2 games. So an insane workload he was getting. I expect him to be utilizing the X role again, where Marvin Harrison Jr. normally plays, and he thrives there. And he only needs 64 and a half when he was getting over 115 in the games without him. So I love his more than 64 and a half receiving yards.
Yeah, some things you got to jump on there if you're playing on PrizePicks. If there's an injury, they're late and the numbers are set differently, you can jump on that. We weren't sure if Marvin Harrison Jr. was playing, but after 1 week return, he's back on the shelf with different issues. So Marvin Harrison and the durability issues open it up for Michael Wilson once again. Now, the Seahawks, as we've talked about a lot in the show, they're very good against the run, but they give up a lot of receiving yards to running backs. Now, that's gotten a little bit better as they've adjusted their scheme a little bit, but it's still not great. They're still near the bottom of the league in that department in covering running backs. So they get the Falcons. That means they get Bijan Robinson this week. His number's very low to me, 35 and a half receiving yards against the Seahawks. Now, we also are expecting the Seahawks to come in. They played really well on the road, come in Atlanta, handle that defense, put up some good points with their offense, and they should have the game script in their control. That means the Falcons on the other side are going to face that pass rush. They're going to have to check it down with Kirk Cousins, get rid of the ball quickly. There's no Drake London, so you can't hold the ball and push it downfield. So that means a lot of dump-offs here for Bijan Robinson. I think he can clear 35 and a half receiving yards with that target share this week.
I definitely looked at that one. I like that one a lot. Definitely was a top option for me. Now, my last one, I'm going to go back to the Darren Waller well here. Darren Waller, more than 7 fantasy points. It's just too low. Like, I get it. He didn't have it last week. He hit 6.7. But again, limited snaps, just coming off the injury. And he was so close to it with just 2 receptions for 47 yards. Like, all he needs is 3 receptions, 40 yards, or 1 touchdown, really. Because 1 touchdown, it's a full PPR league. That means you get your 6 points and your 1 point for the catch, right? So, and he was scoring touchdowns like crazy before the injury. And then the 3 games he played before the injury, 17.7 points. And like you said, that was against the Jets, 18.8 points and 9.2. So easily hit the 7, more than 7 in all 3 of those. So I really like that number for him against the Jets.
Yeah, they definitely are not good in tight end coverage at all. So that's really helpful for Waller all the way through the red zone. Again, you're right. You just need that touchdown. You'll probably cash in pretty early here with Darren Waller, more than 7 fantasy points. Now, I'm going to that same game. Yes. Did you guys know out there that we're going to address the Jets-Dolphins game twice in this segment? No, you didn't. But I'm going back there, and I need this guy. It's a bye week. I am struggling. I've got some injuries. I got two guys on a bye that are really good quarterbacks. They're not playing. Tyrod Taylor, more than 26.5 rushing yards against the Dolphins. He had close to 45, 50 last week, somewhere in that range. So I think he can get there easily this week. He can take off and run, make some plays. The Dolphins turn around sometimes in their defense, leave gaps open. They're pretty good in coverage. So I think Taylor's going to have to make some things happen with his legs. And they should feel good about it, right? His play last week is what led to a win over the Falcons. He was running, moving around, extending plays, making things happen, and that's what Tyrod Taylor does. I think everyone forgot. And he can still run. He's older. He's up there. But when he's dedicated to running, he can. And I like that number. It's pretty manageable, reasonable, 26.5 rushing yards, more than against the Dolphins.
All right, those are our PrizePicks picks of the week. You can join up with PrizePicks with our promo code LOCKEDONNFL and join us in that fun. Now, we're going to close up today's show and this week's of shows with our FanDuel lineup. We'll try to get you that winning lineup for this week. All right, as always, we do not know who we picked for our FanDuel lineup, so it's always a surprise. And when we have the same guys, that means we really, really like them. Vinnie, who do you have at quarterback this week in your FanDuel lineup?
Yeah, this is going to be a recap of two things. A lot of stuff we've talked about during the week and applying that here, as well as things that I actually wrote about at sportingnews.com when I was doing the start set. This, for the first time in a while, I've just used everyone down the line because I can afford to put them all in the lineup. So I'm excited about that, to see what my lineup there can do. Now, Jordan Love is the answer here for me. It's 7,400. I like that price here. He averages just more than 17 fantasy points per game. So that's really good news, right? We're not far, if he gets above average, to push for 3x, 4x return with him. So that's what I really like. In the last week, he was absolutely spectacular against the Lions. He's back at home against the Bears. You can throw on them. I'm not worried about any weather issues. I like the matchup a lot here. So going with Jordan Love pretty easily based on what we were saying earlier in the show.
Yeah, and I'm going with Daniel Jones. So we're both going with our sleeper guy. I talked about why I like Daniel Jones this week. And then with Alec Pierce, I went with him for the stack because you can go with Michael Pittman Jr., who was actually, Pittman was a couple hundred cheaper. They're both pretty cheap. But Pierce has been the more consistent and better fantasy player than Pittman Jr. over the last month or so. So I expect a lot of passing in this game. Pierce has been coming through. So Daniel Jones and Alec Pierce is my stack for the week.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and get my stack, and then I'll give you the rest of my wide receivers here. I do have Christian Watson there to stack with Jordan Love. Makes a lot of sense. I've talked about him all week long, how much I love that matchup against Jalen Johnson on the other side. I also like Rome Odunze in that same game at 6,600 in that matchup against the Packers corners. And I also do have Alec Pierce in the lineup again. I thought about the other ones, but Pierce has been the productive guy. He has a good matchup against the Jaguars corners on the outside, making some plays, feeling the chemistry of Daniel Jones. So that rounds out my receiving core. Watts, Odunze, Watson, I should say, Odunze, and Alec Pierce get it done here for me this week.
Now, my other two wide receivers are Cortland Sutton against the Raiders. Great matchup. You could go Troy Franklin, but I ended up going with Sutton here, hopefully for some touchdowns. And, he was more involved this last week than Michael Wilson because Marvin Harrison Jr. is out and he's super cheap, 5,700. I think he's the best value available in among all the positions right now. So went with Michael Wilson. And then my running backs, I'll get into them. I'm very excited. I was able to pay up for James Cook at 9,300. He's my most expensive guy in the lineup against that terrible Bengals run defense. And then I'm going with Chase Brown on the other side against the bad Bills run defense at only 7,300 for Chase Brown. And Chase Brown has been a good, not great fantasy player, but the reason he's not great is because he's not getting the touchdowns. Well, the Bills give up a lot of rushing touchdowns. So hopefully this can be the week he finds the end zone. So James Cook and Chase Brown are my top two running backs.
Well, I'm also listening to the earlier part of the show and what Michelle has been saying, because I also have James Cook and Chase Brown. I paid up for both those guys. I mean, just the cheapness that I saved really, well, I don't know if that makes a lot of sense, but the money I saved for the cheapness of this lineup has made it possible that I can afford both backs in that same really good matchup against each other, Cook and Brown. So there's not much more to say there. We talked about it plenty here that they are in smash spots hopefully this week. Chase Brown gets a lot of catches, Cook gets a lot of carries, whatever. It doesn't matter how they get it done. Now, I'm going to go ahead and tell you who my tight end is now. Go ahead and get him out of the way. It's Harold Fannin Jr. So I've been listening to myself early in the show. I do like his number, and that's why I can afford some of these dudes that are really expensive this week. Fannin is just too good of a value to pass up right now. So going with Fannin and just thinking that he is going to come through for me with that good return this week.
Now, mine is Dalton Kincaid, and he's questionable to play. So obviously keep an eye on that. If he doesn't play, I'll change him out for a guy like Darren Waller and then probably upgrade my defense, who I'll get to in a moment. But for now, Dalton Kincaid is too good of a matchup against the Bengals. He's too important to this offense. He still leads the team in receiving touchdowns despite not playing here for a couple games. So I'm going Kincaid. He wasn't too expensive at 5,800. And then my flex, I'm going with Quinshon Judkins, and he hasn't been this like dynamic fantasy producer, especially not a guy you'd want in your big main slate lineups and FanDuel. But in this matchup against the Titans, I do think like it should finally be a close game for the Browns. If not, they can finally be ahead in a game. He gets so many carries, right? So if they just continue feeding him, it's a nice matchup against the Titans. They struggle against fantasy running backs. I think this is the week Judkins can have a really big game.
Yeah, I like that. I actually thought about Judkins, and I filled out my flex last. I just wanted to see what I could afford here. And I said, oh, I have a lot more money than I expected to have at the spot. So I just went with Bucky Irving. I mean, listening to myself earlier in the show as well. So sometimes don't overthink it. Irving was 8,000. By the way, Fannin was 5,300. So that, again, facilitates a lot of spending elsewhere when your wide receivers are cheap. Your quarterback is cheap. Your tight end is cheap. You're going to have some very high price running backs. You might as well invest there and get some workhorses. And I got Irving at 8,000. I'll close out. I have Michelle's Steelers at 3,600. I do not like the way Lamar Jackson and the Ravens offense are playing. They're turning over the ball. The Steelers are like an every other week defense. You don't know which one is going to show up in any given week, but I do think the Steelers will be a little bit more motivated. They've heard some of the whispers outside of the building, people getting frustrated. They'll take care of the Ravens this week. And I think they'll get some sacks and turnovers in that game.
Now I'm going with a defense that you don't want to be good this week because you have the quarterback and wide receiver going against them. I'm going with the Chicago Bears. It's a risky one at Green Bay, but they've been playing well. And I do think, I mean, they get so many defensive takeaways, right? They lead the league by a good margin. Jordan Love can definitely have those games where he throws a few interceptions. So I'm counting on that. And they were super cheap at 3,900. Like I said, if Kincaid's out, I will go to Darren Waller, which will give me more room to upgrade my defense. But for now, that's how I have it. My lineup goes Daniel Jones at quarterback, James Cook and Chase Brown at running back, Alec Pierce, Michael Wilson, and Cortland Sutton at wide receiver, Dalton Kincaid at tight end with Quinshon Judkins in my flex, and then Bears defense.
Yeah, I have Jordan Love and Christian Watson, then rounding up the receiving core, Rome Odunze and Alec Pierce, then Cook and Brown, as we've said many times in the show, Harold Fannin at tight end. We got Bucky Irving at the running back flex spot, and then I have the Pittsburgh Steelers defense there to round things out. So really proud team that I'm getting excited to play this week. So I can't always say that about my FanDuel lineup, but the price has just worked out a little bit better than expected this week.
That is it for today's episode. I want to thank you all for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. We will be back on Monday to review everything that happened in week 14. We hope you get your fantasy wins, your favorite football teams win, and all that. Enjoy your Sunday. We'll talk to you on Monday. Bye, y'all.